Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to catch you up on some of my summer reading, basically everything that I read over July and August. This time we are looking at the historical fiction that I read, which as you know is one of my top 3 genres. And so you can imagine I did quite a bit of historical fiction reading. So without much further ado, let's just get straight into these books. First up, I did a reread of Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. Now you may have heard me mention several times that I'm doing a little bit of a rereads project where I go through all of my previously stated favourite books of all time, basically to work out, are these still my favourite? Would I put them on like a top 10 list of my favourite books? Because eventually I do want to make that video, and I am slowly but surely going through all of the Wolf Hall books to work out which of the 3 is my favourite. As I've said before, I do have my suspicion on which one is my favourite, but I wanted to make sure. In this one, we see Thomas Cromwell following the death of Thomas More, all the way through to the execution of Anne Boleyn. So unlike Wolf Hall and unlike The Mirror and the Light, which take place over multiple years, this one is spanning less than a year between July 1535 and May 1536. The pace is a lot faster. It's also a period of Tudor history that a lot of people, myself included, absolutely just eat up. And considering that Cromwell was the main orchestrator of Anne's downfall, you know, if we don't consider Henry, it is really, really juicy stuff. Definitely portraying him in a more sympathetic portrayal than you typically get for Thomas Cromwell. But with these books, you're really getting a chance to look into the psychology of Thomas Cromwell, his motivations, and this portrait of the downfall of Anne and basically their friendship. Well, not particularly friendship, but allyship, as these 2 big personalities clash and Henry becomes bored with her. And I think I am starting to appreciate the faster pace of this book compared to Wolf Hall. I do really enjoy Wolf Hall. It is one of my favourite books, but I do feel like it takes a good 100 pages or so to really get into it, into the style. But in this book, because you've already met all of these characters, because you already understand Hilary Mantel's writing style, I felt like I was able to just jump straight back into this world. Just a fantastic book series, and if you haven't read them, I highly recommend them. Another reread that I had in July and August was Cecily by Annie Garthwaite, which was a book I was actually buddy reading with Shelley Swearingen, who was reading it for the first time. Cecily is the first book in a duology about the life of Cecily Neville, who was a key female figure in The Wars of the Roses. She was the wife to Richard, Duke of York, and would go on to be the mother of 2 kings of England, Edward IV and Richard III. And this book definitely paints her as a woman in control, a powerful political strategist, and at least mentally an equal partner to her husband Richard, even if societally she is not seen as an equal. I really enjoyed coming back to Cecily's life. Having read the sequel book last year, I realised how much I'd missed reading about the dynamic between Richard and Cecily, because they do have a very strong bond and supportive relationship. She can definitely be frustrated with him, and in this narrative she is often pushing him to do more than he wants to do. But the way that their personalities bounce off one another, they are very much a unit. It's also really interesting to read this from this perspective of a younger Cecily who was going through childbirth and looking after children, and how frustrated she feels at the restrictions of this. I remember when this book was originally coming out, people saying that it was comparable to Wolf Hall, and I feel like I can definitely see those comparisons in terms of how shrewd Cecily is, how much she's taking in everything around her. The level of historical detail is not quite as intense as Wolf Hall, especially because of the quicker pace of the narrative. This is taking place over a lot more years, but the comparison is definitely apt, and yeah, I really, really enjoyed coming back to this world. Next, for a book that I read for the first time in July, we have a much anticipated release, which was How to Lose a Lord in 10 Days by Sophie Irwin. I have previously read 2 of Sophie Irwin's books, A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting and A Lady's Guide to Scandal, and very much enjoyed both of those. So seeing that she was doing another Regency romance, but this time one that is a bit of a twist on the How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days film, I was like, sign me up, I am there. And indeed I was there, first day of publication. In this book you are meeting Lydia Hanworth, who comes from a very respectable family who want to marry her off. However, Lydia is not too thrilled at the idea of just being married off for convenience, and she desperately wants to marry for love. However, she has at the beginning of the book received a proposal quite unexpectedly from Lord Ashford. Lydia realises that she cannot say no outright to Lord Ashford. Despite the common phrase that it is a lady's prerogative to change her mind, Lydia doesn't have such a luxury in her family, and she knows that if she were to refuse Lord Ashford, then she would be sent away to live with her spinster aunt, and she desperately doesn't want to do that. However, she sees an opportunity when Lord Ashford lets slip that he cannot publicly declare the proposal and his intentions toward Lydia publicly for 10 days. She and her brother are invited by Ashford to spend some time with his friends ahead of a ball that they will be throwing, and she decides to take it upon herself to make herself so disgusting and unappealing that he will want to jilt her, which leads to some hilarious results. Scenes with Lydia committing many social faux pas, terrible manners, bad clothing choices, anything that she can do to make Lord Ashford see that she is not not suitable for him and want to take back his proposal. However, it becomes clear that Lord Ashford has his own reasons for making the proposal, and is he going to be just as stubborn as she is? Along the way, there is also a bit of a mystery in the house that they are staying at. There is a jewel thief in their midst. So on the side, Lydia is also trying to find out what is happening there. Along the way, finding a different side to Lord Ashford, and potentially they have more in common than they think. This was such good fun. I will admit, I think it took me around about a third of the book to really fully get engaged with this plot. But by the time I had gotten to that point, I was completely sucked in, and I ended up reading this within one day. Obviously, the plot of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is the main inspiration for this book, but what I have noticed about Sophie Irwin and how she seems to adapt certain previously told stories. For example, I am a firm believer that A Lady's Guide to Scandal is very heavily inspired by Persuasion, but what I liked about that book and what I like about this book is that the books are inspired by those plots, but they are not completely beholden to them, and she does make deviations, and there is a clear deviation in this book that makes the plot different to How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, which I really liked, and I think is necessary for a novel that she did deviate. Obviously, I will not spoil what that is, but what I will say is it meant that she was able to tell a fresh story that pays homage but without being derivative. I don't know necessarily if I would say that this trumps A Lady's Guide to Scandal. I think that still is my favourite Sophie Irwin, but I really did enjoy this. There are also some more challenging topics tackled in here that I didn't necessarily suspect, particularly representation of an abusive relationship between two other characters in this book, which starts at a slow simmer and then gradually increases through the book, people recognising this relationship for what it is. And I wasn't sure Sophie Irwin was going to go there, but I think she handled really well. So yes, if you are looking for a new Regency romance, then this is a very good one to go to. Next up, I read The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden, which I believe recently won the Women's Prize for Fiction this year and was longlisted for last year's Booker Prize. So I know a lot of people have very much enjoyed this and sung its praises. This is set in 1961 in the Netherlands. Hello, editing Charlotte here to put in a very necessary clip because I just realised that I completely forgot to actually say what the protagonist of this book is called. I'm looking at the raw footage, I'm seeing myself say "we are following," and then I look down as if I'm going to do that bit again, and then I just carry on to the next sentence that I was going to say. I don't know what was going on there, but to aid and to clarify, we are following Isabel. Was that so hard? No, I don't think it was. Who is living a very isolated life in a house that is owned by her brother. She takes pride in being the mistress of this house and living her life meticulously. However, her brother surprises her by telling her that his girlfriend is going to be staying there for a month while he is out of town, and how this girlfriend Eva just completely disrupts Isabel's very carefully maintained life, and how this stifling summer that they spend together initially irritates Isabel, but then slowly but surely Eva is starting to worm her way into her mind and is potentially starting to get under Isabel's skin. Slowly through the story, more secrets about Isabel and Eva's lives start to unfurl. Everything culminates in quite an internally explosive ending, where Isabel is left reeling, discovering something about Eva's past. As I say, it's a very claustrophobic, very emotional novel. The tension between Isabel and Eva is so palpable, and it has a very melancholy mood. This being said, I did kind of feel a little bit detached to the characters, a little bit more so than I would typically like to be, but that I find is often quite typical for literary fiction. And I didn't necessarily find it realistic how quickly Isabel's defences are broken down beyond a certain point of interacting with Eva. I did also find it a bit irritating that I felt like I knew Eva's motivations pretty early on. It's a book taking place in the Netherlands in 1961, and we reference things about Eva and Isabel's pasts. And both these characters are in their late 20s, early 30s. It kind of felt obvious where it was going and what secrets were going to be unravelled. And I don't know, I wish it had been more of a surprise to me. This is one of those literary fiction books where I am like, yes, I can tell that this is a good book. It's just not 100% my cup of tea. The plot is engaging, the bones of the thing are good, it's just not necessarily for me. And I didn't always find the characters to be particularly believable in all the ways that they acted. Next up, we have The Offing by Benjamin Myers. This is my first Benjamin Myers book after seeing so many people praise him. And we are following the main character of Robert Appleyard, who decides upon finishing school that he is going to take time to travel around England, coming down from the northeast, living simply, very much living off the land, just wanting adventure and to see things he's never seen before. While he is walking through the Yorkshire coast, he comes across a cottage and an older woman called Dulcie, who intrigues him with her wit and her free-spiritedness. And something about her just really appeals to Robert, not least the fact that in a rationing Britain, the fact that she seems to have access to so many decadent rich foods and ingredients from the black market means that he's able to eat meals and just ingredients that he's never had before. And she gives him a perspective and knowledge of the world that he's never had, encouraging him to harness his creativity and to write. fight. Something that for Robert, in a family of coal miners, is something he never thought he had access to. Through the book, Robert starts to realise that his future may be a lot more broad and expansive than he previously thought. I can definitely see this appealing to a lot of people. I can definitely see why this book has had so many fans. I think the issue that I have for me is that I don't need books to have very flowery language to enjoy them. In fact, sometimes I find flowery language to be more of a deterrent, and I'm just like, come on, just tell me what's happening. Just tell me the story. I feel like you could take out half the adjectives in here and I'd still understand the story. It would still be evocative, it would still be vivid. I don't need all this, Benjamin. I really enjoyed the character of Dulce. I feel like she's very well written and I could just picture her. I like this theme of intergenerational bonds and how we can change other people for the better and make them realise things about their lives they'd never considered before. Another one that is not 100% for me, but I can understand why other people like this. Next up we have Lionhearts by Dan Jones, which is the third and final book in the Essex Dogs trilogy. While the previous books in this series, Essex Dogs and Wolves of Winter, were focusing on our mercenary band of soldiers on campaign in France, we're now seeing them a couple of years after the events of the previous book, which ended in 1347. This book is now taking place in 1350, following the Black Death sweeping through Europe, and where all of these characters have gotten themselves to. We see the previous leader of the Essex Dogs, Loveday Fitztalbot, has retired from being a mercenary and now owns a tavern in Winchelsea. Romford, who was separated from the Essex Dogs in previous books, is now a squire at the court of Edward III, while Millstone and Thorpe and a new character, Rigby, had been sent on a mission to Castile. However, along the way, these three separate groups start to converge on Winchelsea as the Castilians start to make trouble on English soil, leading to and culminating in the Battle of Winchelsea, which was a naval battle, and goes to show our former Essex Dogs that they will constantly be plagued by war, and higher-ups wanting to drag them into yet another fight. This book was really interesting because it gave us a chance to see the Essex Dogs under different circumstances to the previous books, no longer deliberately on campaign, on the road to a fight, but a fight finding them anyway. How hard it is to regain control of your life, particularly following a pandemic and also trauma of war. I really felt for Loveday Fitztalbot constantly trying to find peace in his life, but ultimately his past always echoing in his ears. It's definitely a slower book, particularly at the beginning, as we are trying to plot out these three different threads of narrative, catching us up on what has happened over the past 3 years that we've not seen the Essex Dogs. And I feel like I definitely got more into the story as we got further along. But as a conclusion to this series, it is one that is bittersweet and maybe gives some plot lines that you don't necessarily see coming. The final book for this section of my wrap-up is A Place of Greater Safety by Hilary Mantel. Hilary Mantel's massive, sprawling book about the French Revolution from the perspectives of Georges Danton, Maximilien Robespierre and Camille Desmoulins. And it's such a long book because Hilary Mantel is going from their childhoods right the way through to 1793. How their childhoods made them what they would grow to be, how they reacted to what was going on around them, and what would ultimately motivate them to take a stand against the French royalty, how the revolution would gain momentum and ultimately devolve into the Reign of Terror. The paranoia, the distrust, the shifting loyalties that would mean that these three men who were initially allies would turn on each other. It's a really interestingly told book because of the way that, unlike something like Wolf Hall, which is entirely from Thomas Cromwell's point of view, this narrative shifts perspectives all the time, not just through these three men. It's mostly about them, but also we are looking at the lives of other people in their personal lives, particularly their wives. There is so much focus on their home lives that actually the events of the Reign of Terror often just feel like clerical goings on, administrative decisions, rather than like life or death situations. And executions just feel like another part of the business day. It's another historical fiction book where I felt it took me a while to truly get into it because it was so different to Wolf Hall. There are definitely elements of this book which capture Thomas Cromwell, particularly that feeling of noticing everything going on around you, lots of rich historical detail, but I do definitely prefer the focus, the perspective focus that you get from Wolf Hall, and I do feel it like it means that you were able to follow the chronology that little bit easier. This being said, I cannot deny that Hilary Mantel's character work in here is so incredibly strong. No one here I can particularly say that I like, but I feel like I have a better understanding of them and how they might have been feeling. Not that they necessarily were, because Hilary Mantel definitely does embellish or fictionalise certain parts of their lives just to make a narrative flow a little bit better. But especially as someone like myself who doesn't know a whole lot about the French Revolution aside from broad brushstrokes, this was a great little, well actually no, not little, quite chunky introduction to these figures. So there we go, those are all of the historical fiction books that I read in July and August. Please let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today. Alternatively, please let me know about any historical fiction that you read over the summer. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day and look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.